in from the Wits Rural Campus in Mpumalanga, or on the Mpumalanga-Limpopo boundary. And it's a wonderful facility on the edge of the Kruger Park and on the edge of a vast agglomeration of dense settlement in the Bushbuck Ridge local municipality. And we're enjoying some lovely, refreshing rain at present. I guess like anywhere in the country, there's some risks of power cuts, but there is a backup generator. So if anything happens, just keep on going until I can zoom. Last minute changes in speakers. And so Dr. Williams Obeng is now standing in for the acting city manager of Nelson Mandela Bay, and he's deputy director of monitoring and evaluation. And Dr. Obeng, I don't have your bio, unfortunately, so you must please introduce yourself, say a few words about yourself when you speak. I do see Mr. Zayd Ebrahim on screen. So welcome, Zayd. We go back a while. Zayd hopefully will be Dr. Ebrahim soon because he's doing his PhD. And he sits in the intellectual heart, if you like, of the city of Johannesburg, as he's the group head for Joburg's Group Strategy Policy Coordination and Relations Center, which is really the nerve center, or the intellectual nerve center of the city. He holds a master's in management from Wits, an honors in town regional planning. As I said, he's doing a PhD. Mr. Bongumusa Zondo, hopefully, yes, I can see Mr. Zondo is with us, and he's Zayd's equivalent, if you like, in eThekwini, where he's the senior manager responsible for long-term planning. And he's certainly a survivor. He's been in eThekwini, I think, Mr. Zondo, since 2009. That's quite a while. And he plays a key role in leading long-term planning and also in representing the Metro City in international forums, and is supporting learning exchange regionally and globally. So welcome. Mr. Naidoo is speaking for the acting city manager, Mr. Yawa of Buffalo City Municipality. Oh, no. Mr. Yawa, are you here?
Morning, good morning.
Can I confirm who's speaking for Buffalo City?
It'll be myself, Bob Naidoo. I'm sitting in for Mr. Yawa.
Aha, it's just it comes up on the screen as Mr. Yawa. So you're confusing me there.
You can call me Mr. Yawa for now.
No. Okay,
but I'm Bob Naidoo.
Great to meet you. And once again, sorry that we didn't receive your bio because it's a last minute change.
Yes.
And I would also appreciate if you would say one or two words about yourself when the time comes. But sure. I believe that you're the head of corporate services in Buffalo City. So we certainly do have four city leaders with us. So now the organizers will just have to advise me along the way in terms of timing of this session, because we started half an hour later than originally billed. But for the moment, I'm taking the full hour and a half that we were given. So the panel's really focused on what we can say the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal focus, as a tool to steer the future development of our cities towards institutional resilience, and very specifically SDGs 11 and 13. And if you like me, you keep forgetting which SDG is which. So SDG 11 is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And SDG 13 is to limit and adapt to climate change. So two interrelated SDGs. So I'll be asking our city leaders to reflect on the value of this SDG compass for local action, the extent to which their cities have responded. It's an exercise of collective reflection in the hope of promoting learning across a municipality is not just about good practice and showcasing, but a collective engagement around problems and possibilities. And I know our city leaders on the panel are engaged in the day-to-day struggle of making things happen in a context which is often very difficult. And so I'm sure we'll move beyond platitude into a hard discussion. Now, the panelists have asked me to spend 10 minutes providing a context for the SDGs. And I'll also offer a few provocations to the panelists, which they can choose to respond to or not. And I'll certainly ask the question about how the SDGs are landing in a context where some city governments are struggling to perform even basic functions. I can tell you as a moderator, I'll try and balance my multiple selves because I'm also a citizen, an urban citizen, sometimes a frustrated urban citizen. I'm not having water, not having power, fearful for security. But I'm also the academics. I try to keep an analytical perspective, and I'm also the ex-city official. So I certainly have empathy and respect for individuals in city bureaucracies that are committed to the public good and try to navigate the immense complexity of the landscape. And I really admire officials like Mr. Zondo, who've been there so long. So, just over halfway through the SDG period, 2015 to 2030 is the SDG period, we should have a clear sense by now whether SDGs are making an actual difference and what could be done differently for the next iteration. So we're now in Global Agenda 23. The next one will be Global Agenda 2045. So those of you, most of you, except if you're very young, lucky you, will have remembered the year 2000, Y2K, if you recall. But you might remember then that the UN General Assembly adopted the 8 Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, which were indicators with their indicators for development agenda up to 2015. And the MDGs committed global leaders to halving the proportion of people who suffer from hunger, reducing the under-5 mortality rate by 2/3, achieving universal access to public health, universal access to treatment for HIV/AIDS, halving the proportion of people without access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation, and more. In fact, let's be generous because good progress was made towards meeting some of these goals, demonstrable progress. So the number of children under 5 years of age, the deaths of children under 5 years of age, more or less halved in that period. The percentage of underweight children dropped from 28% to 17%, a more than 1/3 reduction in HIV infections and so on. So there was progress, although the global crisis of 2008 was a setback, but there were also challenges because those MDGs were focused exclusively on the global south, where the challenges of poverty were most extreme, obviously. But as many pointed out, actions taken in the global north, in the wealthier parts of the world, have a critical impact on the future of all of us. And we need a global agenda that draws all of us in. The MDGs were targeted at the actions of national governments, multilateral agencies like the World Bank, whereas an effective response to global challenges requires the dedicated focus of all actors, including local government, civil society, the business sector. In the MDGs, sustainability was a sectoral issue. There was Development Goal 7 to ensure environmental sustainability. But it was recognized that given the nature of the crisis we face, the climate change emergency, for example, sustainability has to be an overarching concern that should infuse all targets and goals. So those are some of the challenges with the MDGs. And so an SDG working group was set up in 2013, which developed the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with 17 SDGs, 169 targets. Don't ask me what they are. It's complicated. And that was unanimously adopted at the UN General Assembly in 2015. And it brought an anti-poverty agenda, which was strong in the MDGs, together with a sustainability agenda, which goes back to the UN Summit on Sustainable Development in Rio in 2001. So so it was a really important conflation of two major global agendas. Let's address poverty and inequality, but at the same time, let's ensure sustainability for humankind into the future. And that was critical. Now, we're not going to go through the 17 SDGs, but SDG 11, which refers to cities, was really the symbolic end to an anti-urban agenda which had dominated the post-World War II world. It was an embrace of the role of cities in driving sustainable development. It was an outcome of a, if you like, of a struggle, of an alliance of interests and organizations concerned with developing agendas to ensure that cities were performing their role in addressing poverty and sustainability. It was the culmination of a process which began with the Habitat 1 conference in Vancouver in 1976. And SDG 11 was followed by the new urban agenda, which gives sustainable content, sorry, not sustainable, substantive content to SDG 11. And so you might want to, in your comments, also refer to the new urban agenda. SDG 13 deals with climate change. And certainly by 2015, an understanding of climate change was far greater than in 2000, just as it is greater now in 2023 than in 2015. And the fifth assessment report of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, had just been released in 2014, just as the sixth assessment report has been released earlier this year. And both reports are unequivocal that human activities have caused global warming, and also that the most vulnerable communities who have historically contributed the least to climate change are disproportionately affected, and that's critical. So, yeah, a bit of a diversion, because the timing was a bit off in South Africa, I must say, as having been involved also in the National Development Plan, IEDF processes. So our national processes happened just before the Global Agenda 23 and the new urban agenda were released. And I kind of wonder, this is a bit of a diversion, it's a bit speculative, but I wonder what the outcome would have been if these global agendas were already in place when we went through the national processes. So I remember at the time when the National Planning Commission was set up, we were told it's a bit too sensitive politically to have a chapter on cities in the NDP. There was certainly a chapter on rural areas. So we compromised and had chapter 8, which was on spatial processes. But SDG 11 was clear on the importance of cities, and so was the new urban agenda. It would have happened if the NDP was structured around the SDGs and the IUDF. Not that there was major divergence around the NUA, but that's a little bit of a diversion. But really, there are a few issues to talk about. And very quickly, the first is, and much has been said about the localization of the SDGs, because Global Agenda 2030 is a global agenda, and local governments are far down the food chain. But the SDGs were approved with an understanding that their success depends absolutely on local action. And so the questions we have to ask is how responsive have local actors, municipalities, business, civil society, local actors, how responsive have they been to the SDGs? And how impactful have these SDGs been on local processes and actions? So the question, and it's an analytical question, there's nothing normative or judgmental about it. My question, and I don't know the answer, and I'm looking to the panelists, is what difference has it made to localities that SDGs have been in place? So the localization is an issue. A second issue really is about the impact of COVID on progress towards SDG targets. 2020 to 2022, the pandemic was a critical period, nearly midway through SDG implementation. We might have short memories and the impacts of COVID might be receding to the back of our minds, but the multidimensional impact of the pandemic was immense. And I don't know, I haven't followed what the UN is saying about the impacts of COVID on meeting the targets, but I would certainly be interested to know from panelists, have we been knocked off course Or if so, what are we doing to get back on course? Are the targets still possible to reach in terms of COVID? Very quickly, a third issue for me, and I'm not expecting panelists to respond, but it's certainly that other challenges have emerged along the way which weren't fully anticipated when the SDGs were prepared. So, I mean, just refer to one, the emergence of new technologies, especially AI. And AI will certainly have disruptive impacts in the short term. Its long-term implications are uncertain. Will it launch the world onto a new growth path? Maybe. Will we come to collectively regret its invention? I don't know. But it certainly holds mega consequences for the world of work, for the nature of professions, for education, maybe even for city governance. And so this is something that in preparing the SDGs, I don't think was properly understood. And then fifthly, I'm watching time, so I'll end here. We can't really talk about all of this without acknowledging a widespread sense of a deep crisis in municipal governance in many places, including in metropolitan South Africa. And so many of us have our doubts about the capacities in municipal government to deal with basics, including maintaining critical assets, never mind engaging proactively with global Agenda 2023. So we can't avoid this. And I am asking panelists to talk about the role of SDGs in shaping the action of their cities within the context of a perception and or reality of a deep-rooted crisis, of unstable coalition governments, hollowing out bureaucracies, lack of sustained direction. I do this with empathy because I really understand the daily struggles of committed and sincere officials. So that is a challenge. And finally, but I'm not going to talk about it. I was going to talk about it because this is a City Leaders Forum, and the focus is on leadership towards resilience and creating a virtuous cycle of positive institutional performance. And certainly leadership has been given far too little attention in thinking about local government. We've concentrated on getting the cities in place, but the critical soft infrastructure is leadership. So without saying more on that, maybe comments on leadership. So that's my background, and it's time to get to the panel, and we'll have 3 rounds of response unless I'm told differently from the organizers. And firstly, no more than 10 minutes from each panelist, and to make this work, I have to cut you off at 10 minutes, unfortunately. Else it just will continue too long, and so I will be rude and cut you off after 10 minutes. But you will take us through the journey of your city in responding to SDGs 11 and 13. And then we'll have much shorter 3-minute rounds of response afterwards and maybe time for some audience participation. So I'll just follow the program I was given. And I will then ask Dr. Obeng. We'll start with Nelson Mandela Bay, and also just remember to say a few words of introduction to yourself. Dr. Williams, it's yours. 10 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm not quite sure. We've already submitted our presentation. If it will be shared from the side, or I would have to share my screen. Okay. Thank you very much. Just a bit of introduction about myself. I'm Williams Obeng. I hold a BSc in Development Planning, Masters in City and Regional Planning, and PhD in Geomatics, specifically on land administration systems, both Masters and PhD from the University of Cape Town. And I'm from Nelson Mandela Bay Municipality. I'm currently the Acting Senior Director for Strategic Planning and Coordination. I think that will suffice. And it's not part of my 10 minutes, I guess. Okay, thank you. So according to the brief that we were given, we could talk about either inclusive human settlement, improving safety and livability of residents, or specifically on climate change mitigation, referring to transitioning to renewable sources of energy. And we thought that one was very good for us because of some projects that we are implementing around renewable energy, and therefore the presentation is around those projects. So go to the next slide for me, just to highlight achievements, as I've already said, in terms of the progress that we've made in transitioning to renewable energy. The next slide, I'm jumping because of time. So what we've done since 2021 is to adopt what we call sustainable energy plan, that is to serve as a blueprint in terms of how we seek to diversify and decarbonize our energy portfolio in response to the dynamic energy environment that we experience right now. Also, the sustainable energy plan serves as a guideline on how to engage IPPs, traders, investors, and customers in the energy space on different business and connection models in alternative energy. In addition to that, we also have draft sustainable energy policy that is still going through consultation processes. So these are the blueprints or the instruments that are helping us or guiding us in our pursuit for alternative energy sources. The plan is based on 3 pillars: facilitation, own use, and procurement of new generation capacity. And some of the interventions that I'll present later are classified under each of these pillars. Can I please see the next slide? So the current interventions, the first one that we have is what we call the net billing tariffs. So under this particular intervention, we encourage customers to participate in renewable energy through feed-in tariffs. And at the moment, we have 600 customers that are registered as small-scale embedded generation tariff that contribute up to 26 MVAs of green energy within the municipality. The next intervention, the next intervention is what we call the wheeling tariffs. Here we use GRID to allow IPPs and energy traders to connect renewable energy to third party. The NMBM, in this case, we've signed an agreement with one IPP called the Parsons Power Park, which contributes about 25 megawatts of photovoltaic power plant that will wheel energy in and around the city. And there are 3 other projects in terms of the agreements that are still in the pipeline, which we then seek to create more access to renewable energy for citizens. The next one. So community-based project. In this case, we have a project that we call the Salathuba Gap Tap project in collaboration with NMU, where agriculture and renewable energy converge to deliver sustainable energy provision within communities. Specifically, there is a suburb or a township called Kwazakele here, where we've taken them off the grid, and they are accessing electricity or energy provision, or their energy needs are created or supplied through this particular project. Can we go to the next one? Then we have trading platforms, and the trading platforms is a pilot project for live 30-minute trading platform in the NMBM. The project sees that the ability for NMBM to manage its grid network and helps us to know at all times what energy is being utilized by who, from who, and what the half-hourly profits of the municipality are. These are technical stuff. So we also use this to manage our electricity or energy usages and know who uses what kind of energy within the city. Can we go to the next one? The grid improvement, the NMBM has signed a financing agreement for a grant of over 280 million with the German bank to help us to improve our grid. The grant is aimed at upgrading the grid in the inner city to improve the reliability and efficiency of supply, and therefore attracting renewable energy investments in the city. So there is also a project on how to improve our grid systems. The next one. Energy efficiency demand management. So we are also quite concerned and conscious of how we manage demand. So we've installed 10,000 LED street lights that consume about 70% less than your traditional normal lighting. And we're also in the process of producing an energy efficiency certificate, which will assess the electricity consumption of all the municipal buildings specifically, because municipal buildings consume huge amount of energy, and also to help us develop alternative equipment that will be using less energy. The next one. Solar mast, high mast. We also implement solar high mast lighting systems as pilot project, and we've installed solar panels on top of galvanized high mast steel polar to power up LED lighting in the city. The next one. And then we have geyser control as well. We've implemented this particular intervention for the past 17 years, which has saved the municipality in excess of 70 million in terms of energy consumption. Can we go to the next one? And I think that the next one is my last slide. Procurement of new generation capacity. The municipality has approved an energy plan to buy at least 60% or procure 30%, sorry, of our required energy from IPPs. So 30% of our energy sources are from IPPs. Process is underway to procure 180 megawatts from IPPs in the current year. The municipality is in the process of refurbishing our Mount Road megawatt gas turbine to give much needed relief to load shedding. So in an attempt to mitigate the impact of load shedding, we implement this particular project so that we can navigate through the normal load shedding schedule that is implemented by ESCOM. So Chair, in a nutshell, that is what we've been doing as far as renewable energy is concerned. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And thanks for keeping to time. And it's a very practical response to SDG 13. And maybe when you have your 3 minutes next time, I could press you a little bit on what are some of the challenges you've faced along the way in terms of a learning process. But let's go straight on to Zayd Ebrahim, talking for the city of Johannesburg. Zayd, 10 minutes max.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, Phil. Good morning to all the other panelists. So our presentation will be slightly different. We'll be looking at the City of Joburg's tracking platform and how we're contributing to the voluntary local review. I think taking what you said in terms of how the SDGs were formed and obviously what they stand for, we've looked at a much more interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary way of trying to respond to the SDGs in the city of Johannesburg. The next slide really asks three difficult questions or tough questions, I think, to provoke and justify why we've taken this approach. The first thing, obviously, is are the SDGs still relevant? The target's 2030, which is about 6 years away. Have they had any impact? And is there any form of alignment that integrates with our national and local reporting system? In other words, do we know what we are actually doing at the local level with regard to the SDGs? Now, our next slide essentially covers and asks the key question of why do we collect this data and how can we collect this data at the local level? So why track SDGs, I think, is also probably another difficult question. What we're really trying to do is to look at having some level of data that gives us some precision in decision making. I'm looking at more customized solutions that aren't just about monitoring and reporting about data and indicators from an SDG point of view, contributing to provincial or national reviews, and not sort of allowing it to demonstrate something a little bit more practical. So what we want to really do is how do we measure impact as well? how do we also globally benchmark, and how do we understand, the progress that local government can make and should be making within the context of the SDGs. So that's some of the broader strategic value that we wanted to derive from this tool which we've actually developed and is online. The next slide really talks about that SDG tool for the city of Joburg. It's essentially important for us to ensure us that to allow us to help inform our long-term planning. I think we raised the point that most of our long-term planning and policy positions were done prior to the SDGs, coming into focus. Also, supporting our own impact evaluations. What are we doing? How are we doing it? And whether or not there's some meaningful impact. Looking at the SDG tool, and we'll talk through about how it allows us to identify the gaps and where the activities that need to be prioritized are. And if it can be domesticated and localized to communities as well, is a very important aspect. And lastly, from the city of Joburg, it's also important that it allows us to have this conversation at a global level in terms of how we are able to strategically or locally talk about what SDGs have meant in the particular global South context, and of course, what progress and challenges we've made in that regard as well. The next slide is just a set of the issues that plague us with regard to how we report in terms of no standard methodology, no integration across national and metropolitan areas of comparing data, and how do we actually have a set of standard indicators that we can measure, and how do they actually contribute. So what we've really done is designed our own reporting system that suits our needs and requirements, using Joburg as a good case study, also aligning it to the SALGA initiatives in terms of the voluntary reviews there, as well as what we've undertaken in the city of Joburg. So the next slide is essentially what our open SDG tool is for the city of Johannesburg. The website at the bottom is where you can find the tool. It's an open source, free to use platform, which can be used by other cities or other countries. We're tracking 92 indicators relevant to our context. Our approach was not to track every indicator possible, but to have a very specific set of indicators. Like we said, there are 92 that talk to where the city has data, and where we've been able to use data for the last 10 years. Dare I say that the current sets of data that we're looking at, and this is pretty much on the next slide, in terms of how we're tracking the data, relies on a number of sources, including Stats SA, and perhaps maybe there might be other conversations required in terms of the quality of that data that we're currently looking at for the city of Johannesburg. Nevertheless, across the 17 different goals, we've looked at data that's where we are able to shortlist and have particular indicators that give us that particular 10-year storyline. Indicators where we don't have data, we are looking for data, and there are possible sources of data that we could use. And there are also indicators that are pretty much excluded, which are irrelevant or not, or we are not able to report on those particular sources of data. For example, goal 14, we would exclude the goal, but also within each and every one of these particular goals, to look at data that's not really available at city level, or particularly in a South African context, more specifically. The next slide is just to talk about how we've elevated these sort of tools of reporting to not add additional layers, because we know cities are reporting through circular 88s, through the SDBIPs, their departmental data or business plans, and other forms of data through third-party service providers, and of course, as we've received data from Stats SA or Human Settlements, etc. We're trying to find a system that allows us to integrate the reporting across these various indicators. And if you were to go onto the website, and that's just a screen grab of the data, you can track per indicator where we have data, what this has actually meant in that regard. So I think the tool, which we won't be able to demonstrate now, is actually quite useful for cities to allow some sense of comparison as well, when we would eventually want to get to that point. But importantly, we're not asking for new information that's not out of bounds of what we are usually reporting for in our circulars, in our SDBIPs, and the current indicators. Already, those indicators are close to 200 over and above the 92 that are currently there as well. The next slide just talks about how we partnering with SALGA. So I think it's critical to inform everyone that we are using this information for where the local reviews are prepared to support the state reviews or the national reviews, and where these coordination mechanisms and collaboration can talk about a bigger picture within the South African urban space, and how then that talks to what is in the national sort of storyline with regard to how we've performed around, or how we've performed within the SDGs, given that we are around 60% through that particular period. My second last slide talks about how the draft reviews will form and what we're really looking at focusing on. I think particularly goal 11 and goal 13, but we do take an interdisciplinary view or multidisciplinary view around various actions, various projects that talk to issues around poverty, hunger, food security, stability, governance, partnerships, and whatever else that needs to also be aligned to, and where that data allows us to inform these voluntary reviews as well. The last slide essentially talks about what we really want to achieve out of it, and I think it's beyond maybe goal 11 and goal 13, where we want to not just use our long-term indicators through to understand what the SDGs have contributed to, but these indicators, which would be there for 15 years, are useful in times when we exercise or go through political transitions, where we're looking at integrated planning as also an approach of data management, and how we're also allowing shared data to be accessed across various departments. So from a planning point of view, we want to ensure that it aligns and supports as much as we can. From an impact evaluation point of view, really about how we comparing what those quantitative outputs are and how it assists us to prioritize and call to action a number of key things. And lastly, like we talked about, positioning, we've used technology and data and visualizing the data. We've also been nominated for some awards, but we really want to play an active voice in that particular space, within the Global South, within the SALGA spaces, and nationally, in pioneering how we can report on this two sorts of data and how we can use it for precision in our decision-making processes. I think I've just about got to 10 minutes. Thanks a lot, Chair.
Done it, Zayd. Wonderful, Zayd. Thanks so much. It's on topic and really helpful as a learning exchange. Thanks so much. And let's move now to eThekwini. Mr. Zondo, 10 minutes. Mr. Zondo, you're going to have to unmute.
Okay. Thanks very much, Prof. I mean, I was just trying to see if this moves very well. I hope now you can hear me. Prof Phil, can you hear my voice?
You're clear. You're clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, I mean, what the colleagues have done, they have covered the basics of what we are trying to do as local government, and I can agree with more in this case that if any change were to happen, it will happen in local government and cities, and then of course then cascading into national picture, as it were. The Honourable Minister has reminded us of these commitments that have been made in the world, and in a true manifestation, they are lived experience of people living in cities. So in my approach, I tried to look at, I mean, the SDGs and the targets as they appear here, and then take it that, I mean, because the colleagues have covered the important part of climate change and building urban resilience. Of course, understanding that eThekwini is one of those cities, like others, coastal cities that have gone through trying times, and I think there's no turning back on that. So surely we must breed urban resilience. But if you look at SDG 11, it talks clearly as to what is expected of us, and us as local government in this case, not working alone. So it's simply meaning, how do we coordinate our effort to ensure that we have got access to safe and inclusive green spaces? And in our take in eThekwini is that this become a prerequisite for success. So everybody must be safe. And then in this case, safety broadly defined in the terms of UN as human security, freedom from crime, freedom from fear of crime, freedom from man-made disasters, and freedom from natural disasters as broadly as we understand it. And again, if you look at the new urban agenda, it talks it clearly that we are talking about a well-designed network of spaces, green and otherwise, and then but which are free from crime and violence. I mean, I will emphasize this point very much, Prof. and fellow panelists, because ministers have covered this, but at least in our case, the integrated urban development framework provide us the guidance and with its key strategic goals of inclusive growth. And then we have mentioned this part of effective governance. And I want to add in that when we talk of effective governance and then look at the levers leading to that, it's clear that it is not local government, but it is local governance. So communities equally empowered, educated, and taking leadership in their own right to work with their government to the desired state of development at a ward level, at a regional level, at a city level, and hopefully at a country level. Of course, it doesn't exclude us to ensure that there is effective urban governance on how we deal with resources and how we plan and how we include others. But my approach today, Prof. and fellow panelists and the participants, I like to draw from the right to the city policy paper developed by the UN Habitat toward Quito Conference, Habitat 3 Conference, that indicate that the right to the city is a right to inhabitants present in the future. In essence, what it does talk to Prof. It talks to some of your reflection on the Millennium Development Goals, and I will add and say it also talked to the Rio Summit on sustainable development. Of course, if we put it closer to home, it is talking exactly to what we saw when we had the summit in Johannesburg, and then the Johannesburg implementation plan followed by the National Sustainable Development Framework that was already starting to guide us as South Africans and equally as Africa as to how we see sustainable development. But I like this part that we are not looking only on the present. So in other words, that decisions we take today, they are decisions that have got the impact for tomorrow. So the approach I have taken, Prof. here and the fellow panelists and participants, is to reflect on how we have deal with the issue of safety in broadly understanding safety not as an issue of rule of law, but as an issue of the core mandate of local government, including how we deliver services, how we manage urban spaces, how we plan them, and how we collaborate with all stakeholders that fund themselves in our spaces. And an example that we have done here is when we look at the inner city in what we call then a priority zone. Of course, we have changed the name now, but we're looking at how we work with the textile industry, how we work with those who are selling, traders in our space, whether we call them formal or informal. But how do we create a space that eventually demonstrate that this city is a city that works for you? You have got a right to be here as a resident and equally contribute to the well-being of city and the well-being of others while improving your own livelihood. Of course, we have got a responsibility to do particular things, as we are saying, back to basics. Are we ensuring that we have got lights, our lights are working, our pavement are working, we create spaces where people can easily walk, a walkable and a well-connected city. But the key part that I'm trying to show here is that the issue of advancing safety is not an issue of police, but it's a core mandate of local government when it comes to service delivery. Your lighting, as you will see here, when we light up your way, eventually people feel the sense of safety in this place. When there are people outside, what we call a public space activation, whether it's a boulevard, whether it's a square, whether it's a garden by a taxi rank, which is used by those mamas who are providing food in the city rank, they fresh food and then sell it in the rank, and equally, of course, provide partner surveillance to security and police. And again, I mean, as a city of eThekwini and all other cities, we are capitals of culture in various ways. So how do we embrace that and ensure that, I mean, we allow people to be happy in the spaces using our core mandate, but equally touching to the partnership, because people will embrace what they see in front of them, but equally be part of the solution. So the examples are given here, how we provide sitting spaces so that families come relax in particular spaces, but equally in spaces that have got multiple uses. It may be a taxi rank, there's a market, provide spaces where people can play equally and demonstrate their true heritage. Showcase it to others, but embrace the sense of informality. Of course, I mean, one may say is informality at the end. So it is formal to its great degree. So how do we embrace this and accept that it is a character and the spirit of African cities to be somehow informal in their own right, and equally accept that it is a normality that we live with, but create the spaces and allow people to be proud and of the spaces that they fund, and not only focus in the inner city, by the way, focus in all areas as it were, and then now in front of you, what I'm trying to say is that what then people take as their pride in spaces that they have equally contributed, but do not ignore the issue that we are having, Prof and fellow panelists, that we have got increased level of urbanization. As people move, is it how do we feed them? So how do we innovate in such a way that we are able to meet the nutrition needs of the current inhabitants equally, and if we have that through innovation and providing a healthy nutrition, thereby advancing healthy and productive cities. Of course, I'm saying we could not only do this in urban core, we must also look at the holistically the city. And in our case, our city is almost 60% rural. And then this is an example of Umlazi, where communities themselves, Babumlangeni, taking a lead within the U section of Umlazi to look at spaces that could be improved, and he decided to do this in his own right. And then he said, how long must it take? And the answer should be easy. As long as it takes for us, as long as we live, we shall work for the people that we are employed to serve. The key part linked to the increased level of urbanization is that we are unable to meet this inclusive important right to the city of a decent shelter. But even if we cannot provide a decent house, how do we improve the living conditions around informal settlement? And I'm glad some of the colleagues who have led this work are in attendance here, and then they are seeing the work that they continue to lead in providing great services, whether it's pathways, it's lighting, creating an environment that is really a healthy, safe environment. And it's exactly what section 152 requires of us. But move beyond the physical infrastructure to look at the skills, the soft side, look at the Blackburn village, which is, I would say, is what Charles Dickens referred as a tale of two cities, because a stone throw away to Nzinga Eco Estate and then few meters to Gateway. How do you deal with skills of the youth and linking the youth living in Blackburn with the opportunities in Gateway and surrounding, and working in partnership with private sector and the communities themselves? I will not play this video, Prof, because I think I may take more time. But at last, I want I will no longer emphasize the point that the minister have already emphasized about the use of data, and equally the other panelists have done. But equally vigorously implementing our urban resilience, that focusing on two things: informal settlement and how we deal with land use. I think I should leave it there, Prof. Thank you very much.
Great. Just in time, and thank you for reminding us what it's all about, the right to the city, and reminding us that achieving goals is always relational. It has to involve partnership, and no standalone issues like safety, food security, they're all interrelated. Thanks so much, and let's then move to Buffalo City and to Bob, who's ready for his 10 minutes. You're ready to go, Bob? Great.
Yes. Okay. About myself, I've been in local government for the past 30 years, at least 24 of those years at a senior management post, 7 years as a municipal manager. I do hold a master's degree in administration, LLB degree, higher diploma in law. Right, so I'll stop there, just a very short one. Firstly, I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity, and also an apology from our city manager who was supposed to make the presentation, Mr. Yawa. Unfortunately, he had to be called to another meeting in Cape Town. Now, firstly, we feel a session of this nature are crucial for the challenging period we are facing as municipalities. Hopefully, I will answer some of those issues you raised, Prof, in my presentation. Now, to share ideas and challenges and prospects of these times with peers will surely be eye-opening. We live in a very difficult period that requires sheer precision and skill from those that have been tasked with managing the cities. Now, the UN Sustainable Development Goal 11 calls for the world to create sustainable cities and communities through making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. All work towards embedding sustainable development goals in Buffalo City is done under the overall framework of our Metro Growth and Development Strategy. We call this our MGDS, which is our Vision 2030, very much aligned to our Integrated Development Plan. This vision clearly aligns also with the National Development Plan, more particularly it's leaning towards embedding sustainable development goals. Now, SDG 11, we are working hard to ensure that we build decent human settlements close to the means of public transport, industrial areas, and other amenities for the residents of our city, Buffalo City. Now, to accelerate our human settlement development program, we have signed a housing development agreement with the Provincial Department of Human Settlements and the Housing Development Agency. Now, this will see the municipality, the metro, constructing 5,528 units over the next 3 years. And we believe this will impact positively in the lives of almost 22,000 people in the metro. Now, we do this also mindful of the need to eradicate the apartheid spatial plannings, patterns, and create an inclusive, livable city. Our built environment performance plan, which has a platinum status from the National Treasury, remains a key instrument for us to achieve spatial integration and overall development within the corridors in the city. Our approval of development plans is getting quicker. We've now established also the Municipal Planning Tribunal, so that assists us quite a bit as well. We, of course, would want the system to be quicker than it is at the moment, and this is why we are participating in the National Treasury's Metro Title Deed Reform Support, which is a sub-program. The program supports metros in their efforts relating to the processes focused on title deeds reform to complement and aid Operation Vulindlela and the ongoing efforts of the National Department of Human Settlements in resolving housing backlogs and challenges related to title deeds. We have established an internal working group in the city comprising of our various departments that are important in the approval of development plans. And recently we have now digitalized that program, which is also available to the public. And we believe that will assist the municipality in making sure development applications are approved as quickly as possible. I should ever indicate that the recent census results released by Statistics South Africa, which shows an unprecedented population growth of almost 10 million within 11 years, is a cause for concern for our country. What heightens this challenge for us as a metropolitan areas is the reality that a growth in the population means a growth in the numbers of those who come to cities in search for better opportunities and ensuring difficult challenges of managing informality. Now, Buffalo City, we've been known to be regarded as a rural metro. We have a very huge part of our land that is rural. So you could imagine the impact this would have on our city. So the major challenge we are regarding embedding SDG 11 is the proliferation of informal settlements. Now, The proliferation of informal settlements makes implementing development projects such as providing decent housing quite tricky. People decided to settle in low-lying areas, floodplains, and these areas are often not developable, and they are also an extreme danger to the lives of people. This also becomes a challenge when it relates to SDG 13 in our city, which relates to climate change and adaptation and mitigation. Now, Goal 13 relates, the SDG Goal 13 relates to, as we know, climate actions that should be taken to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Now, Buffalo City climate change mitigations and adaptation in Buffalo City is also part of the overall strategic vision, which is our MGDS that I alluded to. Climate change relates to disasters amongst the major challenges that we confront as a municipality. This year alone, we had about 2 devastating floods and damaging winds, which destroyed houses, displacing people while damaging our municipal infrastructure. We have had these even last year, and we are having to use limited resources for flood relief, a reality that is impossible to fully budget. And you would understand what impact it has for our budget when you have to start moving funds that you have not budgeted for. And it's normally at the sacrifice of planned service delivery and capital investment. Now, natural disasters continue to pose a challenge, and they appear to be frequent in our city. And this is why we place serious importance on the need to embed SDG 13 in all our development efforts. Recognizing the importance of climate change mitigation and adaptation, we have developed a comprehensive climate change strategy. Through the strategy, we have established an environmental and climate change committee, which guides the process of mainstreaming climate change into municipal planning and decision-making processes, as well as promoting integrated environmental management in our metro. This committee has also facilitated the production of climate change risks and vulnerability report for Buffalo City, and this assists our efforts of mainstreaming climate change mitigation. Our municipalities also regularly host the Green Forum, which is intended to promote and strengthen our commitment to sustainable livelihoods and green initiatives. We have established solid partnerships with business and other stakeholders on implementing green initiatives. Among those is what we call the Call to Action campaign that we are implementing together with the Border-Kai Chamber of Business here in Buffalo City, where we have established 4 waste buyback centers. This was our reflection on the need to embed SDG 11 and 13 in the implementation of the development in Buffalo City. Now, we feel these are important topics to engage on, as they are the core building institutional resilience in our cities. These are topics that should concern us as city leaders. I believe that worrying about a challenge of this nature is an acknowledgement of the seriousness we give it, and an important recipe for us to work towards finding sustainable solutions. So this was really an appropriate platform to discuss these issues. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. I see I've got some internet connection.
Okay.
I think we have lost
forums.
Oh, there he is. Prof, can you hear us?
Maybe if Prof can hear us, let's look at some of the questions that he threw at the beginning about the relevance of the SDG to local government at a trying time of governance, maybe as a start, and maybe he will then join us back if that's allowable amongst. Oh yes, Prof, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Lwazi, can you just be the backup, because I do seem to be having some problems. I've been thrown out of the meeting a couple of times. So yeah, anyhow, I was just saying how gratified I was that to hear that Buffalo City is taking SDG 13 so seriously with initiatives such as the Green, what you said, the Green Council. So we've got half an hour left, and
I think the Prof is really struggling with his connection. Okay, there he is, he's back. Over to you, Prof.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm struggling with my connection, but if you can hear me, I'm suggesting that essentially we bring the next two through one round and then another, is to just give the panelists each 5 minutes to talk to two questions. And the first one is to talk about the challenges. They've told us what they're doing.
Okay, colleagues, as Prophet suggested, I should stand in as backup. I think we are nearly towards the end of the program. So, Prof, you were suggesting that perhaps we could use the 5 minutes for each panelist to reflect on the challenges and things that they particularly would like to flag as things that went right in their various bureaucratic policy processes, etc. Is that what you were alluding to?
If you can hear me, I think absolutely. So let's ask them to talk about what went right, what went wrong, what they need to start doing with, what they need to stop doing, what they need to continue doing. And then if they want to respond to other panelists and just take 5 minutes each, I think I'll leave it to Lwazi to do the time monitoring. And then if there's any time at the end, some audience questions. Thanks, Lwazi. I'll leave it to you.
You're on mute, Lwazi.
I was going to say, maybe let's reverse the order from the one we followed and start with the last speaker and work backwards. Maybe give BCM a chance to go for it first. Mr.
Okay, yes,
yeah.
Thank you very much, Lwazi. I think Prof also raised quite a few issues before we could start, so I'm going to look into some of those issues as well. But the challenges faced by the metro, and I think the biggest issue is the climate change and the devastating floods that we experienced in the last year or two. Being a coastal city, we have winds, very, very high speed winds that causes havoc, if I can say, especially in the informal areas. Now, these are issues that you don't plan. You can have a budget, but you cannot plan the impact of the climate change and the impact it has on your budgeting. So we really, as a city, find that as a huge challenge. We try to make amends in terms of our adjustment budget. Now, the impact of COVID, we all know, and the devastating effect it had on our revenue. As we sit today, even 2 years after COVID, if I can give you an idea, our collection rate stands about 60%. Our budget, we budget almost 95% collection rate. That has a huge impact when you budget and you collect less than you budget. It means you continuously have to readjust your budget. Now that comes at the expense of either postponing capital investment, postponing maintenance, and this you would understand what it does in terms of your plans to build a city, build the metro, so that it can also contribute to our national GDP. We do have assistance from National Treasury, but that's not sufficient because these floods, these winds it causes huge damage. Also, Buffalo City, we have areas that are very, very congested, like our Duncan village. So, you know, the impact of these, you have to resettle people. And you know, it causes real challenges for us in terms of land space, because we also want people closer to the city where they can reduce in terms of transport, be able to attend to work without having to spend lots of money and time on long journeys as well. So these are some of the strategies. But going forward, we have good relationships with our provincial department. We have a big manufacturer here, which is Mercedes-Benz, and they come on board. We've got quite a good agreement with them where they assist us in terms of maintenance, especially in some of our roads. In cleanliness of the city, they've got programs together with the municipality where we identify certain areas and they sponsor those areas in terms of you know, projects where they clean up, assist with the rubbish, and that helps us quite a bit as well. And then we have our business sector, which is represented Mordecai Business. We have a number of initiatives with them. As I mentioned in my presentation, we got the callback centers, and not only did they help to clean the city, but they also is part of a revenue generation for the unemployed. And we've got thousands of people that are benefiting from that project, where they get paid for collecting and disposing the waste. So let me stop there, but I think we've got quite a number of initiatives for us. Our backbone is our Metro Growth and Development Strategy, which we continuously review yearly, which is aligned to our IDP. And, you know, we use those documents in terms of our plans together with the National Treasury when we need funding, when we have some of these disasters. So we do get some assistance. But as I said, these changes in the climate does have a huge impact to the city. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Naidoo. As we have heard from PCM, that disaster management and relief management processes and efforts need a little bit of relooking. And we can then proceed to Mr. Zondo, if you can just take us through what your views are with eThekwini and how your processes have been in institutionalizing these SDGs. Just reflections, 5 minutes, 3 minutes.
Yeah. Thanks, Elwazi. I mean, I think the colleague from PCM, Bob, has outlined the issues of the challenges we face with disasters. But I think it also draws our attention to how we build resilience and how we invest on our infrastructure. And even where we may not necessarily be investing in new infrastructure, but how do we maintain the existing infrastructure that its lifetime, its useful lifetime, could still serve us better, especially where we know for sure, I mean, for eThekwini and for all other metros, the issue of the areas that are prone or are vulnerable to disasters, they then become uninsurable, and that spells disaster to us in terms of revenue, whether they are business areas or they are residential areas. So, and again, even in that space, we got a partnership, I mean, with the likes of insurance companies, Santam, for example, partnering with the National Department of DCOC, as led by the Minister, on building resilience in local government, as it were. The other challenge, maybe I would like just to put forward, is the challenge that was raised by Prof. Phil, which I take it also as an opportunity that, I mean, as much as we understand the issue of local governance and governance in general, but the involvement of communities make it easy, because the political leadership exists to serve the communities. So if the communities are aware of what government has committed to globally, and then equally taking their own local community-based action with the leadership, then it makes life a bit easier Of course, we then have to work, we as officials, work with the committees, with leadership to ensure that our policies, our long-term plan, our growth and strategies are equally aligned, and there is a bottom-up feed from the committee-based plans at a ward level right to a region and equally to the entire city, and then interface that with the national commitment or global commitment. I think that's a very important part. But the key part is the local action and their awareness. In other words, looking at empowered citizens and equally responsive governance, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you, Bongumusa. And you made some very important points around the community participation as being a critical success factor, which is something we sometimes don't appreciate as much as we should in the process of doing our planning. Yeah, now let's move on to Nelson Mandela Bay. If Dr. Williams, if you can come with your reflections.
Thank you very much. And just specifically some general issues that many metros and local government as a whole face when it comes to our implementation of plans, which leads to the realization of SDG targets and goals. So for example, budget constraints, I think we all attest to the fact that we never have enough for programs and projects that you've planned towards achieving your SDG targets or goals. Also, truth be told, we have governance challenges, and where you have governance challenges, whether in the form of political instability or administrative instability, it results in what I call competing interests as opposed to complementary interests. So in other words, different factions, with their own sort of interests. So you kind of rip apart what the common vision or the common goal is. And this is also a critical sort of challenge that can affect many metros, not in our case only. Also, you remember I spoke specifically on energy. In our case, we have increasing number of informal settlements. And, the reason why we call them informal settlements is that we never plan for them initially. But when they crop up, then you need to redirect resources to take care of them. And that kind of deviation from initial planning and resource allocation can also distract, putting distraction on quote now, the kind of plan that you would have had from the beginning. Also, bureaucratic processes in terms of forming partnerships and getting into agreements with other development agencies also becomes a problem. Sometimes it takes you more than a year to conclude one agreement, which in this case can affect project implementation. But in summary, there are specific questions of what we need to start and what we need to stop and what needs to continue. I think what we need to start, the previous speaker talked about public participation. We need to start grassroots planning that is informed by the needs of citizens. We know specifically that SDG 11 and 13 specifically talks about human development in summary, and therefore you cannot enforce or kind of suggest for people what they need or what they will regard as improvement in their lives, and therefore grassroots planning is very critical. What we need to stop is that silo approach to planning. I think Buffalo City spoke a lot about human settlement, housing specifically, but then the issue of housing as opposed to human settlement. How do we then blend the issue of putting up top structures together with the provision of amenities and other necessary infrastructures as well? So it's about time we understand urban design and urban planning within the context of infrastructure development as well, and not just development of individual sort of infrastructure that cannot be brought together. I think that practice, we see it across many metros, it must stop as well. What we need to continue is partnerships, public-private partnerships. I think local government or government in general cannot achieve these goals alone and targets alone, and therefore we need to get into partnerships with the private sector and other development agencies to be able to realize the SDG goals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams. And it's a pity we could not cover that element of partnership due to time constraints, because it was also scheduled to be part of the discussion points. But you've made some interesting points around the financial resourcing towards these SDGs and their agenda, and how sometimes our resources don't actually meet the magnitude and scale of the problems they're trying to solve. Political instability was an interesting one, and how it can also have a destabilizing impact. And obviously the siloed institutional silos, which is what the theme of this Urban Festival is centered around. How do we plan our institutions to be more resilient? And silos are definitely not the kind of planning we would like to see going forward, given the problems we have. And then I'm going to hand over now to Mr. Zayd to also give us his reflections. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Lwazi. Apologies, I've got disconnected in the office due to load shedding. So perhaps maybe let me switch on my video so you can see the first challenge that we're sitting with right now. You can barely see me, so I'm going to keep my camera off if that's okay. So I missed part of what some of the other speakers were saying due to being disconnected, but perhaps maybe we should talk about the fact that by and large, the 15-year time period of the SDGs are about the long term or the longer term, if we were to put it that way. However, I think since maybe perhaps the start of the SDGs, 2016, from where we sit in Johannesburg, we've been going through cycles of short-termism. Short-term planning, much quicker, sort of output-driven or input-driven sort of approaches that prioritizes very short-term gains over what we would anticipate for long-term sustainability. And the lack of strategic certainty is one of the big challenges that we've had to encounter. Having our long-term strategy and the SDGs sort of tied up was one way in which we looked to create that sense of strategic certainty for the future. When that falls away due to the kind of instabilities and the challenges and the changes, it makes planning for the long term a lot tougher. So how then do you look at catalytic projects? How then do you look at the big things that you want to do over the next half a generation or 15 years, if we call it that way? How then do we kind of really look at genuine investment in renewables, in mobility, transportation, green spaces, etc.? That has been one of the major challenges that we've had to find ourselves navigating through, perhaps since the SDGs were adopted, and us as cities have had to respond to it, which is probably why having a tracking system or looking at the proper data allows us to ask a couple of questions that looks at whether or not our interventions are making a positive or a reinforcing loop in terms of how we're developing in a particular way, or whether it's setting us back or a bit more detrimental. And I know that sounds somewhat conceptual in the sense of where we're going, but the key thing that we're trying to say is we need to move away from policy to real implementation, genuine solutions on the ground that actually have that positive reinforcement as a result of what you want to create. And being in uncertain short-term spaces makes it a lot tougher to get us into that particular space. I think the other colleagues have spoken about the issues around silo planning, etc. But what's probably important and where we need to start off again is looking at genuine innovative financing, looking at how we can explore new funding models. How then do we get back those initiatives like we had in Joburg, the Green Bond, or public-private partnerships? I think the previous speaker also mentioned that we can't, or we can no longer do this alone. So cross-collaboration, innovative approaches, innovative funding, gathering the right organizations to support and drive with cities the right inputs to prioritize a much longer-term future that's more relevant and is dealing with the unique challenges that are faced is perhaps a key way in which we can start moving in a new direction. I think the obvious things that we also don't want to do or we need to stop is the unsustainable practices of sprawl, land invasions, and looking at genuine solutions around densification, connectivity, reducing environmental impact, promoting social inclusion, etc., as ways in which those positive reinforcing feedback issues can come back into our cities. Other issues I think we're well aware of is over-reliance on fossil fuels and the shift towards transforming to much more sustainable alternatives, I think becomes a key driver of it. And importantly, we need to stop excluding those who are marginalized and vulnerable from our processes of decision-making, planning, development, whatever else it might be. So leaving no one behind, I think, has always been this motto that the SDGs talk about. But genuinely doing it in cities is a much tougher thing to do, especially in large metros, which we form part of. Finally, I think we must find ways in which we build resilience through better preparation, not just preparation for multi-hazards or disasters or everything else, but we've got to be prepared to understanding how we prepare and insulate against the short term. How do we build the right capacities? How do we look at preparing with our relevant partners? How do we diversify our approaches in terms of economy or social diversification? And I think as Prof alluded to in the intro, getting the right leadership that's able to mobilize these issues, the resources, the people, the technology, the innovative ideas, mobilizing and cooperating, channeling best practice and advocating through collective visioning and committing in a much more transparent way is in a very broad sense an approach to dealing with some of these challenges, to actually making significant strides in embedding the SDGs, but also looking towards how we can create sustainable and inclusive urban environments. I hope that that covers most of what I wanted to say. I hope you've heard me through it. I've had some challenges here, but I hope that it was fine. Thanks a lot, Luwazi.
Thank you, Mr. Ebrahim. And yes, colleagues, there you've had it from our leaders at city level. Very interesting insights that they have brought to this discussion, as well as challenges that they are faced with and tasked with from a resourcing point of view, to translating action from policy. I think I would like to dedicate the few minutes we have to just some audience interaction, maybe take one or two questions that our audience that's present in this forum would like to ask to our speakers. Can someone help me with moderating hands? There's just a lot of people. I can't keep up. Just any one or two, please, colleagues, that you may, comments, inputs that you may have on points raised by the speakers. I see Sikomsomi has raised his hand. I don't see another one. Siko, go for it. I see Chris as well in that order. Let's take those two. Siko first, if you can unmute yourself. Siko seems to be struggling. Can we go to you, Chris, and then we can take Siko after you?
Thanks, Luwazi. Sorry, I'll come in. I was just not able to unmute myself as the host just enabled that just now. But my question is around the IDP aspect and simplifying the IDP. I think one of the speakers spoke about the importance of community participation, but I think the challenge when it comes to the community being involved in the development of the IDPs, for instance, the dissemination thereafter of what the IDP is actually supposed to achieve is never realized on the ground. So how do we simplify the process of IDP development so that the needs of communities is met once the IDP is adopted at municipal level? But also, once it has been adopted, the communicating of how the IDP is going to transform local communities and how the IDP actually speaks to the needs of the people is quite important. So perhaps maybe a mapping out of a simplified methodology of communicating to communities around IDP development, and then after how the IDP actually connects or meets the demands or the needs of very communities that it needs to be addressing. So I think that needs to be clear, because we always have IDPs. I mean, in other cities, for instance, IDP has got 1,000 pages, 2,000 pages. Now, how do we simplify that to a one-page IDP, for instance? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Let's take Chris, and then we will revert to the panelists with those two questions. Chris, go for it.
Thanks, Lassie, and greetings to everyone. Important discussions indeed. So just two questions from me, Chair. The first one is really, I think there's a lot of good things that are being done by the various represented parties here. But my question is around peer-to-peer learning in regards to some of this innovative work. I mean, if you look at Nelson Mandela Bay, they were talking around the plans they've got, COJ, eThekwini, and so forth. But how can we enhance the way we do business by involving peer-to-peer learning as opposed to reinventing the wheel on some of these issues? And then my second question is more directed to eThekwini. I just wanted to understand, their long-term plan regarding the climate adaptation plans, because we've seen eThekwini, if not, it was the hardest hit in terms of the floods, and having a lot of families dispossessed and so forth. So what would be the long-term plan to deal with that? And I'm talking issues of, weather monitoring devices, early warning signals, as well as, long-term planning to ensure that there's land available to relocate communities and so forth. So my question is just more around that. And then obviously, from a human settlements point of view, what sort of plans do they have to ensure that there's alternative building technology so that they can quickly respond to these issues? Thank you, Chair.
So I'll start with the first question. It deals with the IDP process, which I think was covered quite elaborately in Bongumusa and Dr. Williams's responses or reflections. So perhaps let me give them a chance to talk about what they have to say about the IDP and the public participation process and how it could facilitate that in some of this work. Bongumusa and then Dr. Williams.
Thanks, Elwazi, and thank to Siko. By the way, Siko Msomi is a chair of an NPC called City People of eThekwini Municipality, established to deal with social challenges, including homelessness, or addressing the plight of those who are experiencing homelessness within eThekwini Municipality. The process on the IDP, I think the process itself, it's fine. It could be improved, of course. I mean, in terms of how we broaden the engagement and also change the modalities, because I mean, for example, in eThekwini, we are now 42 out of the 4.2 million people living in eThekwini, 42% is under age 85. And those are the people that would not necessarily come into a city hall for engagement or into a community hall. It simply means that we need then to leverage fully the experience that we had in COVID of engaging virtually with various stakeholders around the process itself, and especially building it from the bottom up, that colleagues have raised, and I think the minister also raised it within the context of DDM, looking at how we do joint planning with communities at a ward level, coming up with your community-based plans that are prioritized, looking at the already existing assets, and even go through scientific methods like the access modeling and others. But the key matter that Siko is raising is how we ensure that the IDP is accessible to all. And I think, I mean, initially eThekwini, we had cracked that. I mean, for as long as I could remember, eThekwini had a 35-page IDP document. But eventually, when there were changes in then requiring that all sector plans are attached, then it then goes thicker. But again, we still have got a room, and we are exploring that. Siko and those who live in eThekwini will have seen the work we are doing around simplifying SDGs and simplifying the how we communicate the 6 transformational areas of our DDM1 plan. So we are going to use the similar way, infographics and various ways that we can simplify this, and so the communities can see their expression of their community-based plans come to life, and then got feedback from their elected officials on monthly basis as required at a ward level as well as at a zonal level. And in cases where a partner need is not met, and then they are engaged equally during the mayor's or speaker's engagement and all of government. But another part that helps as well, I mean, beyond just simplifying the document, is the continuous engagement through Operation Sukuma Sake as a key part of district development model, because it brings all of government together, as well as the government companies and the communities themselves in that regard. Of course, we need to improve upon, it doesn't work in all wards seamlessly, so we still need to improve upon the work of war rooms, the task teams and district task team. I don't know, as if I must go to the issue of the urban resilience that the colleague asked. I will leave out the peer-to-peer, colleagues will cover that. But the one on the resilience that specifically was asked to it, must I go it through now or must I wait? Yeah, go to it.
For another day. Maybe let's then just give Dr. Williams just a quick one as well to have a bite at this participation issue, since it came out on his reflections. Quickly, Dr. Williams, not more than a minute.
Okay. No, it's fine. So I think we must, one of the things that we should stop is the conventional and compliance-driven public participation that has become a tick box, and then getting attendance registers for auditors. That must stop. And I think communities are becoming tired of that particular exercise. They've known the secret. They know that we are there to just tick the boxes. And therefore, taking us back to the first demonstration by eThekwini, I think we need to create a platform for continuous citizen engagement. It shouldn't be periodic. It shouldn't be like, this is the IDP process or this is the IDP period. So we've opened up public participation for this period and then it closes. You know, this continuous engagement with citizens will help us to understand their needs, will help us to understand the gaps. And therefore, when it comes to, you know, the IDP, you know, process time, you have the data already. You know what the community wants. You know the gaps. I mean, through your complaints management processes, you're able to identify where the service delivery challenges are, and that will support whatever formal processes or public participation processes that you engage during your normal IDP development processes. And I think we must also have, I'm not sure about ward profiling, we should understand our ward profiles. And these things cannot be done, you know, in 1 month as part of your IDP review process or development process. So we must have, you know, enough time to go through and understand the ward profiles to know which services and which infrastructure is required at which ward, so that these inform our budgeting and the IDP process as well. I think there are more to add on, but just also to end with how do we simplify the IDP? The IDP is a legislative sort of process and document, and therefore, as the previous speaker said, there are certain annexures that you cannot avoid, and therefore we are also supposed to do executive summary of the IDP, and then the simplification of the IDP, I think, comes out of a skill of how one simplifies or summarizes the content of the IDP. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, colleagues. Colleagues, I note that there's a lot more hands that came out of the floor, but due to time constraints, we're going to have to move on swiftly to the next bit. The only downside with hosting these kind of events online is that there is no lobby with a snack corner or a coffee corner where we can then say, please engage the speakers when we break away. So with that said, I would like to thank all the participants in this panel, as well as Prof. Phil Harrison, and we apologize on his behalf for the challenges with connection there. And once again, colleagues, we are very grateful for your eagerness and participation. And the speakers are here. We are all here to serve. Through you, Ausdi, I will then hand over for us to move to the next bit. Thank you.